Shortly after Christmas, December 27, 1983, Turkish prisoner Ali Ağca, serving a life sentence in a penitentiary in Ancona, Italy, for the attempted murder of Pope John Paul II, receives the least likely visit imaginable. It is the 63-year-old Pope himself, by his own name, Karol Wojtyła. He asks the man who wanted to kill him 2 years earlier if he speaks Italian, and when he gets an affirmative answer, he sits down next to him on a plastic chair in the corner of the room and talks to him in a half voice for 21 minutes. About what? Neither of them ever reveals. But it seems that the Pope will find out what he wanted to know. After the meeting, he declares, "Everyone says Ali Ağca is a professional killer. That means it was not his initiative, that someone else gave the orders. Who this someone else was, however, we can still only guess." The future Pope Karol Wojtyła in Wadowice, Poland. His father was an army officer, his mother a teacher. He spent his childhood like many other boys. He learned well, he liked sports, and during football matches he mostly played in goal. At the age of 8 his mother died, and at 12 his older brother Edmund, a physician whom he looked up to very much. At grammar school he met probably the only love of his life, a Jewish girl from the neighborhood. In 1938 he entered the University of Krakow, where he studied philology and various foreign languages. He would eventually learn 12 of them. He also underwent military training, but refused shooting. After the beginning of the German occupation, he had to work first in a stone quarry and then in a chemical factory. In 1941, his father died, and the 20-year-old Karol was suddenly left all alone. At that time, he began to think about a career as a priest and enrolled in the then illegal seminary. At the same time, he was involved in the anti-Nazi resistance. He contributed to the rescue of several Jewish children. He almost lost his life twice. The first time when he was hit by a German car, and the second time when he narrowly escaped a Gestapo raid during the Polish uprising. After the war, he began his steep ecclesiastical career. In 1946, he was ordained a priest, and 12 years later, the Pope unexpectedly appointed him a bishop. At 38, he became the youngest bishop in Polish history. He then continued at the same astonishing pace. He waited only 5 years for the office of archbishop, and another 4 for the cardinal's hat. At the beginning, the 70s, he was one of the most influential and respected cardinals in Vatican. And then comes the eventful year, 1978. The Pope Paul VI dies, and another Italian, John Paul I, is elected in his place. He died unexpectedly just a month after his election. By the way, there is still speculation that he was actually poisoned. 2 other Italians are vying for the vacant papal chair, Archbishops of Genoa and Florence. But since neither of them was able to get the necessary majority for himself, the name of the Polish Cardinal Wojtyła came into play as a compromise and a way out of the crisis. And to everyone's amazement, Karol Wojtyła received 99 out of 111 votes, and became the 264th Pope in line. But above all, the first non-Italian Pope since 1523, and the first Slavic Pope in history. Karol Wojtyła would spend the remaining 26 years of his life as Pope, under the name John Paul II. He would become one of the most respected and beloved heads of the Catholic Church, not only in the 20th century, but quite possibly ever. Above all, he had an unquestionable influence on the fall of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. His first trip to Poland in 1979, when he spoke before hundreds of thousands of people ideas that were not even whispered in the Soviet bloc at the time, has already gone down in history. It's logical. The more one loved him, the more the other hated him. And so comes the fateful May 13, 1981. 2.5 years after his election, John Paul II drives through St. Peter's Square in his open limousine, blessing onlookers. That's when it happens. A gunman appears in the crowd with a semi-automatic pistol in his hand, and before anyone can stop him, he fires a series of shots. 4 of them hit the Pope, 2 in the lower abdomen, 1 in the left arm, and 1 in the shoulder. The shooter, Turkish assassin Ali Ağca, is pacified by bystanders, and the Pope is taken to hospital. He's about to receive his last rites, but after surgery, his condition begins to improve rapidly. He himself gave credit for his healing to the Virgin Mary of Fatima, who was to appear for the first time on May 13th to 3 poor children from Fatima, Portugal, setting in motion a series of events that are now considered the most famous miracle of the 20th century. At the time, Virgin Mary is said to have predicted to the children the attack on the Pope. Ali Ağca then came up with a number of conflicting versions of who was behind the assassination. From the secret services of socialist states, to the Islamist regime in Iran, to conservative circles within the Vatican itself. What was true and what was not, only he knew. And after that strange meeting, perhaps even the Pope. Anyway, John Paul II forgave his almost murderer, and thanks to that, Ağca finally got out of prison. And today, when he is in his 60s, he is a free man. But back to John Paul II, and the way he led the Catholic Church for more than a quarter of a century. In many ways, he was unique. For example, he made more journeys than any other pope in history. He literally went all over the world, even to the most backward countries, preaching to huge gatherings in churches, in open spaces, in stadiums. His sermons in Manila, Philippines, were attended by 4 million people, and he was never afraid to criticize the local powers and to stand up for poor and persecuted. Another of his specialties was the amount of canonizations. During his time as Pope, he canonized nearly 500 people and beatified more than 1,300 others, more than all his predecessors combined. He assumed that the attainment of holiness was not to be accessible only to prominent leaders of the Church, but also to ordinary people. John Paul II also did much for reconciliation with other religions and with other Christian churches. He was not always successful. For example, he never made his longed-for trip to Russia because of the opposition of the Orthodox Church there. But in many cases, he did succeed in breaking down years of animosity. His opposition to any kind of war, humiliation, and in fact, any kind of injustice deserves mention. For this reason, too, he has made an unprecedented series of apologies for the Catholic Church's past mistakes. Among other things, for its participation in the slave trade, for its part in the historical denigration of women, for its inaction during the Holocaust. From all this, it is clear that John Paul II brought new thinking to the Catholic Church in many areas. On the other hand, on certain issues he remained very conservative. It was mainly about the traditional concept of the family, which in his eyes must always consist of a husband and wife and children. He was fundamentally opposed to abortion, but also to contraception, including condoms, for which he was widely criticized during the AIDS epidemic. In the last years of his life, John Paul II had serious health problems. He suffered from worsening Parkinson's disease and arthritis. He died at the Vatican on April 2, 2005, at the age of 84. The last words spoken by an old man who changed the Catholic Church, and to some extent the world, in his native Polish they were, "Let me return to the house of my father."